Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of DoubleDM podcast where Niels and I, Emil, discuss TTRPG GMing, and today we got an exciting episode for you all. This episode 49, is about dungeons and I can't wait for you guys to hear what we have to say later on. But for now, let's get into pre-show business. First up, Why Your World Matters 3 is fast approaching and you should get ready for another awesome world-building discussion about creative process and inspiration. This time, especially with a focus on traditions and holidays in world-building, as we actually wanted to do this episode before Christmas, but now we're here. Well, now you get to see us live on the 15th of January at 1 PM EST on Sage's Twitch channel. Link will be in the description of this episode. Next up, I have some short info on Titan's Call. What I mean by that is that Titan's Call recording session 1 will be next Sunday and I am ecstatic about it and what we will get up to. I am sure you guys will read all about it on our Twitter as I can't contain myself and will tweet about it all day. And with that, there is nothing left for me to do but to ask you to give us a nice review and or 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and or other platforms. With that, enjoy episode 49 of DoubleDM Dungeons. Hello and welcome to the next episode of DoubleDM Podcast, episode 49. How are you doing, Niels?
I am doing fine. Can't complain, really. Yeah, I crushed my math homework today. The one that I got back, I got 100%. Everything right. That's good. Can't complain.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Nothing specific TTRPG related, really, but
I had a session.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I had a session. We just last session, the session before that, we went into this flying castle and we ventured down into the dungeons and found a 6-headed dragon that we broke the magic item that was holding it asleep, and then we freed it. And after we freed it, it asked us, since we were the, let's call it flame touched, which is just a fancy title for the people that have solved the dragon mysteries. And then he said, shall I call them? And we said, yes, do it please. And then he did. And then he called all the dragons, every single dragon that in existence.
Oh boy.
To this paradise, let's call it that. There might be a few exceptions of those dragons because we need to talk to them.
Yeah, as you do.
We need to address our audience. No, generally we just made him call all the dragons because we need to try to stop the apocalypse basically, and we need the dragons for that, kind of. And then we woke up at the one of the palaces, or the palace of this place where we are right now, which was a place, the palace of a dragon before. The dragon is now dead, and we want to keep it that way. That's why we called all the other dragons, because if that dragon awakes, apocalypse happens.
That's not good.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't seem healthy, right?
Yeah.
Apocalypse isn't good for the general health situation of everyone.
Yeah, I think you lose your bonuses over that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it isn't covered by dental.
Oh, definitely not. No, but really, we then had to flee the scene because the dragons are still arriving. They need their time to come here. And the lizard folk, let's call them that, it's not D&D though, had some problems with us, with the visions they got through us calling all the dragons here and a little bit. So we had to flee the scene and we had to take refuge somewhere. And then we decided, okay, let's follow this half-dragon being, which is the person that killed my character's father.
Okay.
Has the same goal as our arch nemesis, but has a different plan, it seems. And we need to follow her now. And now we're in this big crater, which has been transformed into more this valley, whereas 8-legged dragon is nurturing itself like a baby in the womb with pure arcane energy.
That doesn't sound good.
Yeah, we don't want her to be there. Let's say that.
I mean, alone, I think even the 4 leg extra are just a little too much. You know, even the 6-headed dragon has about 5 heads too much. Why do all the dragons have weird specific limb counts?
Because that makes them interesting. Okay,
fair point.
Watch out. The 8-legged dragon is actually the let's call it earth dragon, an elemental earth dragon, and the 6-headed dragon is an artificial dragon created by the god dragons, the dragons which have the status of being a god, to be for that specific purpose. Call all the dragons here if you can.
I see.
And then it was imprisoned by the lizard folk. At least we think that is. We don't actually know why it has been imprisoned down there, but maybe because it's causing weird visions for everyone. There's still some stuff to figure out, but this adventure from where we are right now till we have convinced or not convinced the dragons is the second to last chapter. It's the penultimate chapter of this campaign.
Okay. I'm stoked to hear more about this as it goes on, because it sounds like an interesting campaign. Yeah. For me, basically, there's just 2 sessions coming up this Sunday when this episode releases.
This Sunday, 2 sessions.
Yeah. One from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And one from 7 p.m. till I think around 10. 11-ish, 12, something along those lines.
That's a lot of sessions.
Yeah.
Both player or
no, both DM.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
How?
But the good thing is,
how do you no Niels, no good thing. How do you do that? Because DMing 2 times a day, it's not easy.
I'm not sure yet. I haven't done it before. Let's see how this one goes.
Okay. So the first session is about, what's that?
It's the 3rd session in a new campaign. They just arrived in a big city, and one of my players just randomly shot a guard by accident and is now in prison.
By accident. What does that mean?
They tried to do a performance in a full marketplace.
No.
And one threw an apple in the air and tried to shoot it. But the net 1 said, no, you don't. I rolled randomly where it hit. It hit a person and not anything else. Then I rolled to see which person it hit. It hit a guard. Luckily for them, it was a higher ranking officer with more hit points, so he wasn't killed instantaneously.
Let's rewind that. Luckily for them, it was a higher ranking officer that they shot.
Yeah, difficult. If it were just a normal, let's call them grunts, they would have been dead instantly and they would have been murderers.
And now they're just attempted murderers.
Exactly.
I get it.
Exactly. Yeah, but let's see how these shenanigans play out.
Okay. Because the session, this recording airs after that session, do you have anything planned on how to resolve that? Do they break in and make themselves all criminals, or do they go through a trial, or do they take on some work? What do you have planned?
I have planned some notes down for a trial if they want to do a trial. I have written down some points about the fine and the things they have to do to atone, let's say, some work, some quest for the city. And I have made some points about prison itself. If they decide to break in or break them out, whatever they want to do. I have some things prepared. So let's see how this all plays out, because they also have a time limit on this. Because in 3 days from now, the main plot, let's call it that, arrives in the city.
And you thought you would just give them like 4 days of downtime in the city to prepare and then wait and then...
Exactly. Just for some roleplay shit, or maybe just, I have some rat infestation in my basement. Go kill them. Okay, sure. Yeah, so no to that. Let's see what they want to do. Yay!
Okay, and session number 2?
In session number 2, I actually had prepped for a longer period of time, because the last time this group played was 1.5 months ago. In the Christmas month in December, the one session fell through, and so I have all the notes already done. I just have to look them up again, but it's basically one traveling episode and then the start of a new arc, a small one, in a mining town where they want to clear a dungeon because there are legends which kind of combine arcane magic and divine magic in objects. And there is rumored to be one such object, and the wizard of the party is exactly writing a thesis about this topic. So they wanted to look stuff up about it.
Okay.
Basically. So yeah, that's not that much. The first one though, oh boy.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. But yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, okay. As of today, as we're recording this on a Friday, on the 7th of January, do you know what that day is?
Probably not.
Probably not. The 7th of January, my friend, is the DoubleDM idea anniversary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly 1 year ago, the idea of a podcast about DMing has been spoken out between us two.
Really, it's been 1 year already?
It's been 1 year since we got talking about that.
It just didn't feel like a year, but all the emotions and stuff that happened, like 2 years, are packed into this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also, next Sunday, we're gonna have the first recording of Titan's Call.
Yeah.
Which 1 year since starting this project, and 1 year after starting this project, we start our second project.
Yeah.
I mean, that feels nice, right?
Yeah, it does. It just fits perfectly.
And now, the last thing even. The past week, from the 30th of December 2021 to the 6th of January, or the 5th of January 2022. My dear listeners, DoubleDM has made a whopping 509 listens in total. That's nearly, because the week is 7 days long, nearly 100 listens a day.
Yeah, what I can't comprehend.
I can't as well, but it is here and we are gonna celebrate it. So yeah, thank you everyone who has listened to the show. I hope you all also listened to this episode so we can properly thank you. I mean, when I saw that we actually have basically shot through the sky with our listens and metrics, I went like, wait, have we been hacked? Has someone hacked the statistics? And we waited for a week for more or less confirmation on that and hoped that maybe the statistics would clear up, maybe not, but they didn't, and now we're here, and
it's just, wow, guys, really, thanks a lot for this. Really, really cool.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I'm still missing words for this. It's just,
I'm as well. So I think we should get into our episode about dungeons. Before Niels and I just stare at each other, not knowing what to say. So we will see you all, or hear you all, after the ads. GemMedFirefly.com combines nerdy interest and aesthetic attitude into one awesome store. Find shirts of the highest quality and softest comfort along with home items such as mugs, blankets and flags. Collections like the Dungeon Glitch geeky designs or the Spicy Not Safe for Work section offer a variety of unique graphics perfect for your message, attitude and lifestyle. Profits from the shop have planted thousands of trees to fight hunger and climate change, while also supporting notable charities and game community causes. Check out the link below or visit gemfirefly.com and skim your favorite shirts right now.
And with that, welcome back to episode 49. Today about dungeons.
Yeah, dungeons.
The first question, as usual, what even are dungeons? What do we mean when we say dungeons and talk about?
Well, first of all, right, we're talking about dungeons today, and dungeons are, when you look at the cover of one of the most popular or the most popular role-playing game in the entire world, they seem to be one of the most integral parts of the game.
I mean,
obviously we're talking about mutants and masters. No, obviously we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and obviously it's dungeons. So yeah, dungeons seem to be a very big part of TTRPG history, even because D&D is often considered as the grandfather of all role-playing games of this whole genre. And the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons actually was about Dungeons and Dragons. Not like 5th edition, where, yeah, it's about, I don't know, tieflings and...
horniness?
Tieflings and horniness, exactly. I think that's Horns and Horniness is the new title of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
But yeah, dungeons, right? What is a dungeon? I mean, if you think about it, a dungeon, for me, is a semi-abandoned structure, a big structure, meant to be explored.
I would actually add something to the abandoned structure, at least for my definition, usually it's at least partially underground. Because I think if it's on the overworld and it's just an abandoned castle, I would consider it a ruin.
Yeah.
It's splitting hairs. I mean, a dungeon can be a ruin and vice versa.
For
but
definition's sake, for this episode, I would count a ruin still as a dungeon because I think I would put them under the same head when we're talking about today. But yes, if you want to talk about the actual definition of a dungeon, it's an underground structure filled with traps, monsters, and loot.
Perfect.
That's it. And I would say that a dungeon is obviously, because it's a basic definition, a lot more than that. And I would say an abandoned ruin, which you can still walk through and explore. I think exploring is the big part of dungeons. If you only have one room to explore, that's not a dungeon, right? A basement is not a dungeon, but not infinite, but corridors, cave systems, and rooms of traps and monsters. That is a dungeon, right?
Yeah.
Something that is a lot more than just a single room.
And I feel like it always, or it most of the time, needs some sort of maze-like characteristic to it.
I believe, I think that's where the exploration I am talking about comes in, right? It doesn't have to be an actual maze or a maze-like structure, but really exploration, right? It should feel like there's freedom to explore here.
Yeah.
There's freedom to wander around and find different things. And I think that's, for me, the basic definition of a dungeon. A structure you can explore. A structure where you don't know what you expect and where you buy into the mystery of exploring this place. And I think that's a good definition. Again, people out there are encouraged to disagree with us and make up their own minds and their own definitions and their own points. We're not here to give you all the answers, because we can't, but also because we don't want to. So
exactly.
A dungeon. So, Niels, I wanted to ask you, because we made this joke in the beginning. First edition of D&D was Dungeons & Dragons, and now it's Horns and Horniness. I don't think, well, everybody knows dungeons aren't that important as they were in the previous editions, and especially like in the first edition or AD&D, where it basically was the game.
Yeah, it was basically a huge dungeon crawl and now it evolved into a bit deeper and more stuff.
So I want to ask you, in a usual campaign you have, what is your dungeon to session distribution? So how many dungeons do you have in a camp? Like, break down me the quotient of how many sessions of your campaign have to do with dungeon.
It depends on the setting we are in, but in general, I would say probably once every 10 or 15 sessions, maybe less. But that might even be a bit much. There are some campaign types or campaign arcs that are more dungeon focused.
As well, once every 15 sessions, or you only take one session for a dungeon, or do you take longer than that?
Again, depends on the dungeon they are exploring. How big this dungeon is and how long they want to stay in there and explore. But it can be half a session if it's a really small one, or they just rush right through it and don't care about the backstory or why it is there and stuff like that. Or it can stretch up to 2 or 3 sessions, but not much longer than that, because then it just drags on.
I would say for me, around for every 10 sessions, there's like one session which is a dungeon or adjacent to a dungeon. And the rest of that is filled by having different things, right? And having fun different ways. But dungeons can be fun.
Definitely.
Dungeons can be a lot of fun. And I think if you make them right, which arguably a lot of people do because it's been so long part of this history of the game, that actually a lot of people can design very good dungeons.
Oh yeah.
Because they've played through thousands of them. And again, dungeons are very cool. If they are not your playstyle, well, you don't play them. But I believe that a dungeon should be part of a fantasy world, not because it's like this video game or history type of idea that I have that a dungeon needs to be there, but it just makes sense. In a world of elves and long distant races, magic, mages, gods and demons, which arguably all isn't prevalent in our world when you look outside. I mean, there should be structures. I mean, even in our world, there are abandoned structures, ruins, and underground structures that are still explored. Pyramids built by ancient people built by ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
Those are to be explored. And obviously, in a world where there are even more mystical and fantasy elements than in ours, there needs to be this element as well.
Definitely.
I would say that mystical and fairy tale and whatever side enhances the dungeons in popularity, for example, because there are a lot more things that came before. There are a lot of more mysteries that we as humans who are playing the game don't understand. So
yeah,
dungeons can be a lot of fun if you want them to be fun. If you just want a few rooms underground for combat, well, you can do that too, but that's gonna be fun for those that enjoy the combat, but not because of the dungeon, right? A dungeon is a setting piece that you can make a lot of fun to enjoy. You can also just make it a setting piece, a background for the interesting stuff like combat and puzzles and traps, like we talked in the last episodes.
Exactly.
That's okay. That's okay, but I think you can do more.
Then let's talk about this more.
Okay.
How can we make them fun, engaging, all that kind of stuff? Let's break it down.
Okay, what I believe is important for dungeon is, before you even start with the dungeon, is the hook to that dungeon. The story hook for your players to go into that dungeon. Because I totally understand that the dungeon itself needs to be cool. And that's what we're gonna get into. But like we talked about this with Derek from DMDM Studios, nobody cares about your cool things if you don't have anyone to explore it.
Exactly.
You can have the coolest dungeon in the world. If your players are not going there, the dungeon is useless for that campaign. Period.
Yeah, you kind of need something that gets them mentally engaged in the idea of going there and exploring the cool shit you just made.
What the thing about a hook is, you can create the hook after you create the dungeon, but you can also create it before, because you can think of the dungeon, you kind of think of everything kind of serving a purpose for your game. If your players, for example, in expectation management in session 0 said, I want to have a lot of challenging deadly combats, then you could design your dungeons around deadly combats. And then the hook you can derive the hook from that. Okay, my dungeon should be dangerous and deadly, so it's gonna be a combat dungeon. Okay, the hook is there's a lot of monsters there and they need to be eradicated because they are endangering the citizens of this town. Boom, you have your hook. It's an easy hook. You can put that on a quest board and your players can take it up for money. But then you can also put in lore and mysteries your players want to, personal quests. One player is out to destroy the ancient Lich King that rules over a big part of the continent, and this is a dungeon of his. So the player would want to go in there and find out more of how to stop the Lich King. That is another hook, right? You can draw the hooks from everywhere, and you can find, like, basically it's like a puzzle. And I'm talking about the actual puzzles in the real world where you put pieces together and make them fit. You have your players and you have a dungeon. The dungeon might not even be finished yet. The players might not even be finished yet. This could be your hook to your campaign even. This could be your first session and you want to hook your players with this dungeon for the whole campaign. You have two pieces and the hook is this piece that connects the two. And the thing about it that is, it needs to fit on both ends. It needs to fit the players and it also needs to fit the dungeon. So all these three pieces need to fit together. Or well, the two pieces, players and dungeon, need to fit together through this connector piece of the hook. And I think that's why the hook is a very important, because, for example, I don't enjoy just sending my players out to clear dungeon after dungeon after dungeon after dungeon after dungeon after dungeon, as it becomes part of like their daily routine as adventurers. We are meant to be the dungeon cleaners. We are supposed to clear dungeons. That's not what I enjoy.
Yeah.
I enjoy my dungeons as a big set piece that is intricate, that takes time for my players. If that actually takes time outside of the game, if it's just one session or three is irrelevant here, but they are supposed to be this big set piece for me. And the hook is one of the big points of that big set piece for me.
Exactly.
So please, Niels, add to my list what is also important for a dungeon to be good.
You need to, let's say we start with the hook of the dungeon. We have the general idea where the dungeon should go, and we have the motivations for the characters. Then we build the hook to match those two together. But from that hook, we can get a vibe for the dungeon. What type of feeling the dungeon needs to convey, or what type of goal the dungeon should accomplish. As you mentioned, there may be, for deadly and hard encounters, it's filled with monsters, traps, etc. But they can also be the horror side, where it's just shadows lurking around every corner, or lore-based. So you have beautiful reliefs on the walls and history written in ancient scripture, which the PCs then can explore and extract information from that. So you need to kind of tailor the dungeon around the idea you had, the adventure hook you've written, and the goal the players want to complet, and then tie it all together with the feeling and vibe you create for the dungeon.
Yeah, I think dungeon feeling is very important, and there's a lot of different feelings we can get into. What I also think is important is the freedom to explore a dungeon. As we said already, a dungeon needs to be open. You need to let your players run around in there. A dungeon is not a connection of just single rooms after another, in my opinion. It just doesn't feel right to me to just queue rooms behind one another and let my players walk through them one by one. You need to have at least it should feel like they are exploring this place.
Definitely, there needs to be some interconnection between certain rooms and corridors, which then can lead back to each other again. Not just a corridor with one room, another corridor, another room in a straight line. If that's your vibe, go for it. But it's not my kind of tea.
Yeah, mine as well. One thing about that, obviously, is if you have this interconnectedness, if you have dungeon rooms that link to each other and different paths, how much of your dungeon should you map?
It depends on the type of dungeon you've written and how prepared you got into this, if you know what I mean.
Well, I'm talking about how much of the dungeon should you actually prepare.
Yeah, I like to have a rough sketch of the layout of the dungeon. And then maybe populated with some traps that may or may not be active at my choosing, let's say. If it's been empty for too long, maybe the wires have been rotted down and stuff. But I like to have some sort of traps installed there in any way, shape, or form, and I like to create the general layout of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, how exact should you be? The thing is, if you make yourself a map, you don't change that map anymore, right? The thing about a map for a dungeon is if you have the map prepared, you make sure that map gets played. You don't change anything about it. Dungeons should feel cohesive.
Yeah.
And you don't achieve that through a DM just doing as they want, really.
Yeah.
If you as the DM hold all the power and use it to just enforce your will on this dungeon, you will also enforce your will on your players, and that's what you don't want to do. Your players should be free to choose what they want to do, right? That's what we talked about a lot already.
Exactly.
And as with traps, right? We talked about the placement. The placement should make sense. And the same goes for dungeon rooms, for example. The placement should make sense.
I think I know what you mean now.
The thing about it is, I'm not saying a DM needs to have a 100% exact map of their dungeon, but you can't place the entrance room as the second room in the dungeon.
Yeah.
That's just not possible. And you need to understand your dungeon before you let your players run around in that dungeon, because if you don't, you're gonna run into maybe problems that contradict each other. You may run into problems of your players understanding that this dungeon actually isn't that interesting. So, right, I'm not saying that you should actually make a map or battle map of the whole dungeon, because I don't do that, but there needs to be some sort of understanding of how this dungeon works. That could be through random tables, right? That's also a form of mapping this dungeon out. Every room they enter has a 1d6 roll of what trap, or if there even is a trap in this dungeon. Then you have mapped out this room, kinda. So that's what I want to say. How much should you understand your dungeon beforehand actually using it?
And I think I would say as much as possible without overworking yourself about it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to make a complete battle map of the whole dungeon. That's not necessary. But I think understanding where you put which room and why, and the rough sizes of them comparatively.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we're talking about in percentages, I would say prepare at an 80% scale of your dungeon.
Yeah.
With 90 and 100% being make an exact battle map, make everything to the point, and you have the freedom to sometimes adjust to your players, in my opinion. You're allowed to do that if it fits better. Like, you can leave out a room if you think this dungeon is already dragging on and you don't want the last room before the dungeon boss, and just say, well, we leave this room with this trap or puzzle out for ease. That's okay. If you have a map that forces you to use that room because your players on the map will go through that room, then you've put yourself into a corner, because then you have to use the room at least. You can obviously still not use the puzzle in the room. Yeah, that's true, but we're getting into room design in a bit, so then you might understand why I'm saying that you should just leave out the whole room if you delete something from the room or the challenge from the room. So yeah, prepare your dungeon as much as you need to make it feel like it's an actual set piece, like it's an actual thing that is not alive but has been lived in, that feels real in your world, that makes sense in your world, right? It doesn't have to make sense in our real world. It only needs to make sense in the world you have.
Exactly.
And then just go from there and have fun. So,
and regarding that, real quick, because a dungeon needs to make sense, because it isn't a coincidence that it is placed where it is placed.
exactly.
It is man-built or elven-built or whatever, humanoid or not built. It is there for a specific reason, and it has, or at least had once, a specific purpose.
Yeah.
It's not like a tree, oh, a bird shed out a seed, now I'm growing here. This is not how dungeons appear. They have a specific reason. It would be, and there might be a magic item in the making. The dungeon shitting bird, I'm in it, but it isn't how they are usually created.
Yeah, dungeons need to make sense. Again, just like traps, just like puzzles, they need to make a cohesive inner world sense. An inner world means your fantasy or your homebrew or your official world. If the dungeon would make sense in that world, then you're golden, right? And that's how you start designing a dungeon. Or that's how you can start designing a dungeon. You can start anywhere you like, really. Think about the background of your dungeon. Who built it? Why did they build it? Why did they build it here? What is the region around the dungeon like? Because maybe the dungeon was forgotten. Maybe the dungeon was abandoned. The monsters or creatures from that area might take refuge in that dungeon, and that's the population you will find at the dungeon when your players go delving in it. So thinking about the surroundings of that dungeon gives you hints of who's in that dungeon, and also of how the dungeon is built, how it should have been built, right? A dungeon in a swamp wouldn't be deep because it's a swamp, right? Normally you wouldn't have a dungeon in a swamp. Aside, the swamp came after the dungeon, but
exactly,
right? Think about it. Think a little bit about the dungeon, a little bit of the background before even actually going into the black box that is the dungeon so far. The dungeon is still a black box for you now. Just think about the outsides of it. How does it look from the outside as well, right? Think about the background a bit, and you will find new things to pull from. Write some stuff down you want to write down, and then use that stuff when building the dungeon. So, Niels, you already talked a little bit about dungeon feeling, but why dungeon feeling is so important, right? Can you reiterate that?
Because it sets the tone for the session you're playing right now, and the idea or the quest. Let's say it like that. And the quest your adventurers are on right now. Depending on what type of goal they want to achieve, there needs to be a certain feeling to it. If they need to rescue someone, they want to feel heroic. If they are tasked to rescue kidnapped daughter from a peasant in the nearby village from this dungeon, you shouldn't make it a lore-based dungeon, because it would conflict with the task and the idea that you had in mind for the dungeon. So the feeling needs to match this kind of whole bundle of things that is the session itself. If you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay. You need to think about the purpose the dungeon is supposed to serve for you and your players, right?
Exactly.
And the feeling is a lot important. For example, I can think of 3 feelings I would convey in my dungeons. So those are the ones that I would have in my dungeons. One would be my horror dungeon. A dungeon meant to, right? D&D is a power fantasy, not really good for horror, but you can still have a dungeon which is about the sense of actually not supposed to being here.
Yeah, you can still scare the shit out of your players.
Think about the Alien movie with this.
Mm-hmm.
The spaceship they are on is a dungeon.
Yeah.
And there is a monster there. And it's about surviving in this dungeon. It's about finding stuff out while there is something horrible, something dangerous in the walls, in the ceilings, behind you, and just generally in the darkness. And that is fun. If you want to evoke a feeling of horror, dungeons are great.
Yeah.
You can do a lot with dungeons.
Because they're just a big unknown for your players.
Yeah, exactly. And since they're about exploring, you can do a lot with horror. As well as, in my opinion, the simple, like you already said, lore dungeon. You have a lore dungeon. A lore dungeon could be, is when you want to lore drop something for your players. The extinction of the ancient Yuan Ti race. So the dungeon should include a lot of places where they can learn information that they haven't had before. Put a library in your dungeon with books that the players can read. And that's already a big step in that direction of a lore dungeon. And obviously the monster dungeon.
Yeah.
big thing, lot of monsters, lot of enemies, opponents, deadly, lot of combat. If that's the purpose of your dungeon, then populate it with a lot of monsters, a lot of interesting combats, and that's what you will achieve. So think about when you are creating a dungeon, before you even create rooms and things, what type of goal should this dungeon accomplish? And I think a dungeon could have several goals, obviously, but it should have one goal for you as a table. Is this dungeon supposed to serve us in combat, or serve us with lore, or serve us with this and that and that? But obviously, for example, one thing for every dungeon that I think is very important for a dungeon, because a dungeon is an exploration experience and a combat experience as well. It should reward your players. Dungeon should include any kind of reward, be that lore or the obvious loot.
Yeah.
If you have that, a dungeon will feel better. If a dungeon is not filled with rewards for your players, it's not gonna feel good for them. So, dungeon is a system connected of rooms, right? That's what we said. A dungeon is just a bunch of rooms put together to make this underground or not underground structure that you can explore.
Exactly.
So how do you design a dungeon room?
That's a loaded question. First of all, yeah, it is, because you have to think about a lot. First of all, in the general thing, how many rooms do you want to have? This then leads to what functions do these rooms serve, and how are they arranged, and what is the purpose of those rooms? Mm-hmm. These are the things that just come to my mind when I get the question, how do you build a room? What is the purpose of the dungeon? How many rooms are there? How are they connected? And what is the purpose of each room?
Yeah, I think each room should, just like a dungeon, serve some kind of purpose for you. But a room's purpose is different than a dungeon's purpose, right? The dungeon purpose is like this overarching big thing, and you should have that in mind for every room you create in that dungeon. But you should also think about what this each dungeon room could have. And let's say for a room, also a corridor would also be considered a room, just for simplicity's sake.
Yeah.
A dungeon room should have, at least in my opinion, two purposes, because the less purpose a room has, the more boring it is for your players.
Oh yeah.
Because the less engaging it becomes. So what are some sample purposes? Well, I think about, especially with our last few episodes, traps and or puzzles are great purposes for a room. They are challenges for your players to overcome, and and require sometimes interesting solutions. Boom, engaging. Combat is one of the most obvious things in my opinion. It's very easy and it's very effective too. Next could be lore. Mm-hmm. Lore reveals information, and that rewards loot, a loot room, the treasure room, or something, right?
Yeah.
Some others? Do you have anything else?
Some sort of, it depends on how large the dungeon is, but some sort of, not specifically safe room, but a safer room than the combat rooms could be a thing. Depends on the vibe you want with your dungeon.
I want to intersect there, sorry, but I don't think safe rooms are good for dungeons.
Worded that wrong. Not a safe room per se, but maybe some, like the living quarters of guards or the ancient living quarters of the guards. Yeah. Not a specific purpose like lore, loot, or whatever, but it could be a tactical thing where the party could lead monsters or dangers.
I mean, that's the thing, right? There I would have to disagree. Because the thing is, you shouldn't think about, this is a room where my party can gain an advantage. That's something for the players to decide, no?
True.
The thing is, if you, like you said, the ancient quarters of the guards, that's a lore room in my opinion. You can find out how these guards have lived. If your players want to use this room as well as, for example, a room for resting for the night, that's fine too, right? There was this one question on Twitter the other day or a few days ago from Matt from Roleplay Chat about giving people a safe room in a dungeon so they can rest and then face the boss of the dungeon with a long rest. And the thing about that is, why should you make that room? Your players can clear out a room and make that room their own and make a long rest there, right? They can just clear out this ancient guard room, barricade themselves in it, and sleep in it. Yeah. That's possible, right? But you shouldn't you shouldn't design that room around that purpose, for example. That's why I don't want to. That's why, right? And I don't think you wanted to say that, but you.
Yeah, but
you don't want to save room, right? But what you wanted to say is you should have a room that isn't meant to be part of the actual dungeon, but part of the living in that dungeon.
Exactly.
Right? The quarters of the guards.
Yeah.
They need a toilet. They need some place to store and eat. And those things I would have even considered under lore room. But we could also just easily separate the two of this needs to be some sort of housing. If someone has lived here, if someone lived here, there needs to be some sort of accommodation for someone living here.
Exactly.
Someone's not going to live on a dungeon floor on the ground sleeping. They're not going to do that if they have to do that for 10 years of their life, or 100 even, if you're talking about longer living races.
Yeah,
no, they're not.
That's what I meant to say. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. It's great that you brought up, because I would have forgotten that part completely about this.
Mm.
But what I want to say about dungeon rooms is no dungeon room should have no purpose, right? Every dungeon room needs to have a purpose. You shouldn't have a room that is just there to be a room for your players to explore. There needs to be something. And that something can be as insignificant as this is where they go to shit.
Yeah.
Then they can just walk through that room. That's okay. But if there is no purpose to a room, that's just not gonna be engaging to your players. The shit room is a fun little joke, an intermission. Maybe even information is there. I don't know, but can be interesting. Can be. And that's why I think you shouldn't delete, for example, the challenge from a room, but keep the room when you made a map. When you made a map and say this is a puzzle room, and you delete the puzzle and keep the room is not gonna be engaging, because there's nothing in the room. I read this once where someone said, if you have this ancient cultist dungeon and there's a giant pillar of chaos energy in the middle and it's doing nothing, why do you have that pillar there? You need to think about what that fucking thing does, because it's not going to be engaging if it's just there as a set piece. It needs to be an engaging set piece. And it's easy to just place something there. But thinking about what that means and making it engaging is the fun part, right? Role-playing games are about engagement at the table. You don't get that with an empty, boring room.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I believe the more purpose a dungeon has, the better. But for example, another purpose for a room could be narrative. If the players went on a narrative quest, they are following their BBEG that is also going through dungeons. Critical Role Campaign 2 comes to mind. The ending. That's a narrative focus for a room when characters meet their arch nemesis of that campaign. I'm not gonna spoiler that for anyone. So yeah, if they are following someone into a dungeon, a narrative room could be a room with just a door, a big heavy door that has to be opened, and the players seeing a scene unfold with their arch nemesis opening this big door with their magical energy.
Yeah.
Then this room serves the purpose as well. But if the room is just a room for the sake of being a room, you shouldn't include it. And I think that's where this 5-room dungeon design comes in, right? There's this design of dungeons that a dungeon only have 5 rooms, and the rooms should be this, and this, and this. And yeah, that's good if you want to do that. But you can also do your dungeon longer. But this 5-room dungeon design prevents you from making purposeless rooms.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing about it.
Yeah, and I really love that idea, because you can use some accommodation rooms, let's say that, like a toilet or a storage area, as just flavor for your explanation on how the room looks, but keeping the purpose as the whole room itself. The dining hall, for example, could be a room with either a combat encounter or a lore dump, or whatever thing you want to have there. And next to this, there is a small outlet where there are barrels with food in it. It's just a reflavoring or more flavoring to your narrative or to your narration of the general looks of the surrounding. But it isn't, I wouldn't count it as a room in the 5-room dungeon thing.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah. So one thing about dungeons is obviously the population of that dungeon. So how do you populate a dungeon, Niels?
How do I populate a dungeon? Think about who should be there and why they are where they are. Especially in a monster dungeon, you should think about who is there. In a lore dungeon, you should think about why they are there and why they are where they are. You don't need to fill every room with an enemy or a monster or whatever, especially in a lore dungeon. For example, they could find an archaeologist who just walked in before them. Why is the archaeologist there? Think about that. What is he trying to find? And on the monster hand, try to keep it coherent. If you start with a slime, don't end with a dragon. Keep it in the same realm of monstrosities. If you have a mostly aberration-filled dungeon, don't go with suddenly there's just a cave bear because it fits with the challenge rate. If there is a narrative reason why the cave bear is where he is, sure. But not just because, I need a challenge rating 1 creature. now I have a cave bear. There's still a lot of options you can take to still keep it coherent while choosing which types of encounters or population you want.
Yeah, think about, again, the background of this dungeon a bit to find the monsters you seek. That's a cool word. That's a cool phrase. Find the monsters you seek. No, really, think about it. If this dungeon is from a mad mage, boy, again, another reference. Wow, I'm on a roll. No, if this dungeon is from a mage, and this mage has a lot of their own creations in this dungeon, those creations have broken out. Then the boss room could be a big centerpiece laboratory, for example, where the biggest monster is still to break out. It breaks out when the players enter, right? Easy peasy. But the rest of the dungeon is filled by things that should have been made by this mage. So, for example, a slime could be very interesting. They've made their own artificial slimes, or ooblexes, or whatever they are called. Interesting, cool. But then, for example, with the mage, you kind of get to circumvent a lot of this cohesiveness, because you can just say, well, this mage could also have summoned a demon and is holding that demon captive in his laboratory for studies. And that's the demon, that's the end boss of the dungeon. But it still should all adhere to a certain feeling. And that feeling is the one you decided on the beginning. If the feeling is Mad Mage Dungeon, then you can think about, okay, what monsters would be in a Mad Mage Dungeon? But every monster this Mad Mage can make. So, for example, why should the Mad Mage make a normal beast creature? Why should they make an owl bear? Why should an owl bear be there? That's a normal creature in your world, right?
Yeah.
That's boring for a mage to dissect and be interested in. But a slime, how could this be a creature that's kind of alive but kind of not? That is interesting for study for a mad mage, for example. So a slime would be a good monster for a mage dungeon. If you have, for example, like I have a lot of UNT and snake temples and dungeons. I use a lot of snake inspired and homebrewed snake monsters and snake alike things. So yeah, a basilisk, for example, is one of my favorites, and is gonna be one of the guardians of one of the dungeons my players are gonna explore. They already know that.
I mean, it's an iconic creature.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting fight, having a big room and this long basilisk in the middle protecting the door to the treasure room or something. It's so cool, and it makes sense, and that's everything I want. It made sense, it's cool, it's fun. Boom.
As long as you're in with that realm, you're golden with your dungeon.
Yeah.
As long as it makes sense, you don't have any rooms without a purpose, and the population makes sense in its own right, and you have fun playing it, you're golden.
Yeah, that's about it. One thing though, especially in correlation to population of the dungeon, I would suggest make your loot in correlation to your population.
Oh, yeah.
If you populate your room with a high-level creature, because you have high-level players, you should also have high-level loot there.
Definitely.
It should feel rewarding to the adventurer that actually is clearing the challenge. 100 gold pieces is not gonna feel good to a level 15 adventurer with 1,000 gold pieces. Or, well, 1,000 is actually not that much. 10,000 gold pieces in his pocket.
Yeah, 100 gold pieces is just peanuts.
That's a fraction of their net worth.
Yeah, it's just pocket money for them.
Yeah, populate them in correlation to the mobs, to the dungeon monsters, and to the feeling of the dungeon, obviously, right? A mad mage's loot could be, first of all, their study research. Make that as advanced as you want, especially depending on how many creatures there are, really.
Yeah.
If it is an ancient treasure dungeon, you just want to give your players loot and magic items, and there's a dragon, let's say an adult red dragon in front of the loot room, you should have a legendary magic item in there. At least.
Oh yeah.
There are tables in the DMG and on the webs for this distribution. You can use them, but just think about distributing loot according to the challenges of and feeling of that dungeon. It should feel more rewarding than it was a hassle to get the reward.
Definitely.
Right? A reward isn't a zero-sum game. Reward your players just that bit more than they've put effort in to make them feel good. Come back to the next dungeon if you want to have another dungeon, right?
Yeah.
It's the next dungeon can be harder than this dungeon and maybe harder for them even though they have new loot or something, right? But if you have a dungeon, let them go through that and then reward them with something that is equivalent or greater to how hard the dungeon was.
Yeah. The one thing that came to my mind, as you said, there's an ancient red dragon in front of the loot room. Don't be afraid to use this classic stereotype of a red dragon sitting atop of a pile of gold. That can be a lot of fun, especially because it poses challenges within the combat. Because
Yeah.
climbing up a pile of gold coins can be slippery.
And with fist bands, you also have the Horde Mimic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's
No,
something.
Yeah. But really, think about the feeling of your dungeon, think about how to populate the dungeon, think about the purpose of each and single room, and then reward your players according to the challenge of that dungeon. You could give your dungeon a dungeon rating, a DR, according that there is a correlation of all the challenge ratings, of all the traps and dungeons and length and tribulations and whatnot all, and then make your own a table of how much loot you should put in there. If you want to do that, I wouldn't suggest that necessarily. Do what you want for fun. I just think that rewarding your players just that tad bit more than the challenge they've put in or the stuff they put in is gonna make them feel good and accomplished, which is something you want after a dungeon. If you have players clear a dungeon, you want them to feel good. You want them to feel like they've had fun.
Yeah.
And the best way to make them feel like they've had fun is, well, first of all, the journey on the way should be fun, but also rewarding that journey on the way, making sure that nothing on that journey was wasted.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. That was my point.
Okay. And I think with that, we have explored the topic dungeon,
We
right?
did some great diving into dungeons, in my opinion. We've delved a little bit about how to make them, what to put in them. There's a lot more to unpack, and I suggest listening to the trap and puzzle episode because both of these are integral parts of dungeons that we didn't touch on here because we've talked about them before.
Correct. And with that, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod. Visit our website at www.doubledm.com. You can also donate to us on Ko-fi. And with that, thank you for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Have a good 2022, everyone.